So I was doing some research for a video that will be coming out in the next few days, and I found this really interesting section on rebel bases from the classic Star Wars sourcebook, the original West End Games Guide. And the section has informed a lot of what the lore has said, but not really a ton of the stories. When you think of rebel bases, before I continue, what comes to your mind? Probably Hoth, maybe Chopper Base if you have good taste. But the reality is, or at least the fiction is, that the vast majority of rebel actions would not have been accomplished through large-scale operations like this. You've probably heard of rebel cells before, and Star Wars Rebels actually delves into this somewhat. Andor has started to. I hope and think it will even more in Season 2, but as the sourcebook explains, while the Rebels did have formidable military complexes, they are rare. A typical Rebel base is the tiny apartment in Tran Mariel where a few Rebels run an underground holo network. Most Rebel facilities are small because they must frequently move to escape Imperial forces. But there's another element to this as well, one that I really think Star Wars media has missed, and I guess that's partially the fault of even A New Hope. Having rebel bases be on their own means that the loss of one is not destructive to the overall rebel war effort. And this really makes me think of Nemik from Andor, who painted the Empire's tyranny as unnatural, something that will break down, which is only able to sustain itself through sheer force. And I think of the communications beacon they use in Andor. That itself is a very small rebel base, and the sourcebook says that the actual number of ground bases throughout the galaxy could be in the millions and probably even more. This is also something we see with Saw Gerrera. He stays on his own so that nobody can take him down through carelessness. It also reminded me of the Resistance from 1984. In that novel, there's obviously the oppressive government, and members of the Resistance supposedly work on their own, doing small tasks, never knowing more than a couple of other people in the Resistance, so that the whole net can't come crashing down. Now, that ended up being a lot more complicated, and I'll leave you guys to my 1984 video to find out why. But the sourcebook also lays out some standard rebel facilities. First off, we have the supply cache. The book notes that this is everything from large generators and weapon stashes to things like blankets, comm stations. Some of these probably would have been like ordinary warehouses, maybe even hangars with rebel ships, maybe even entire space stations, but a supply cache could be a locker hidden somewhere, or just a plate that can be moved to find a communicator. This is grassroots rebellion. Another is the surveillance post. Pretty simple. This could be an ordinary apartment, but a dude is monitoring traffic going in and out of a certain location. Or it could be a passive sensor which tries to intercept Imperial communications. We're sort of continuing to move up in scale because next it talks about recon bases. These are generally at least temporary stations where strike teams can stake out and even attack specific targets. Depending on the setting, you could imagine an urban recon base again could be an apartment, whereas if the target was somewhere more remote, it could be a full bunker inside a forest, for example. Moving up in scale, we have the outpost. And now we're getting a lot more into what we generally see in Star Wars media. And I do think it's a shame that we don't have more stories focused on the small aspects of rebellion. I think you could tell a really cool story about two individuals maybe doing what they can to try to fight the Empire, even in a very limited way. Maybe it's like a dude on Coruscant who observes the Pizza Hut nearest to the ISB headquarters and notes when they start getting a ton of orders in and phones off to some far-off rebel commander because they're probably planning some operation. But a good example of an outpost, which I'm discussing now, I think would be Chopper Base. According to the sourcebook, an outpost is a rebel ground facility with the resources for a permanent base, including power generators, hangar and repair bays, medical wards, long-range transceivers and sensors, computer centers, life support equipment, troops, technicians, commanders, recreation facilities, and some defenses. Outposts typically have, again, between 50 to 500 personnel and are usually meant to fulfill some specific mission. And I guess Chopper Base doesn't really fit that requirement, but that was in canon at least early Rebellion era, so it's fair. Next up in size is the operational base. This houses between 1,000 to 15,000 people. Most individuals within the Alliance will never know the location of nor visit an operational base. This is where they keep their real military resources, and obviously they're very tough to set up because of the stranglehold the Empire has on the galaxy. A rebel base in space, nice, would probably be called a port. Finally, the largest rebel base is the headquarters base. Pretty simple. This is where the top brass would meet, and the best example, Yavin. If you wanted to critique Rogue One, I think one thing you'd mention is that the rebels were way too lax with their Yavin 4 security. Like, they should not have had all these people, including senators, in one place, especially where it is so valuable. Ideally, you'd really want to find a more decentralized method of command for everything, but, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, I suppose. Now, you may have noticed that so far, I haven't mentioned any actual rebel allied planets, and that's because there weren't many planets which openly allied with the rebellion. Certainly not many of note. The sourcebook does note that rebel colony worlds did exist. The Empire mostly didn't care. The one planet I'd say which openly rebelled against the Empire of any note is Mon Cala. I've done a whole video a few years ago actually about why the Empire didn't openly attack Mon Cala, and that was largely due to the political situation of the galaxy, i.e. Mon Cala was heavily defended, and the Empire was worried that if they were seen to struggle against a single planet, that the galaxy's fear in them would fail. Plus, they had a secret weapon on the way, the second Death Star. The plan was, hey, finish the Death Star, destroy the rebel fleet, then you can go over to Mon Cala, pop it off, no questions asked. Like, a big element of the Empire that's not seen is the fact that so many of the Star Destroyers in the Imperial Navy were dedicated to defense and patrol. You pull one of those ships away from duty, not only are rebels going to notice, but they're probably going to attack. And again, that's due largely to the decentralized nature of the Rebel Alliance. If you can manage to get a hangar and a command center on a small mountain somewhere, you can launch attacks in nearby systems with X-Wings, which are hyperdrive capable. As long as you've got the fuel and the weapons to keep them stocked up, you can take advantage of Imperial mistakes or lack of defense. We'd often see little Imperial outposts in games like Star Wars Jedi Knight, just little bases built for a specific purpose, which Kyle Katarn then goes in and destroys. I think it would have been very cool to see something like that for the Alliance, a purpose-built structure, intelligently designed, that maybe you go in as the Empire and just completely take apart. Again, key to the entire Alliance structure here is decentralization. However, even though low Alliance members did typically operate on their own, obviously there was still communication with general sector commanders. They too would work with both the military and civilian arms of Alliance High Command, but were generally left to take care of their own business. And that's also true of the smaller sector forces, which had a lot of independence, and that was kind of necessary. The Essential Guide to Warfare, however, points out that when it comes to the fleet specifically, Admiral Akbar actually unified and reorganized a lot of the available forces so that he could really hit at the Empire. And this was specifically in the later stages of the war when they were getting more and more ships and Imperial defectors. But that's all I got for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know of a story in this sort of universe and lore you'd be interested to see. And of course, let me know what you thought down below. Goodbye.